Well, peace, friends. I'm Pastor Tom Arthur from Sycamore Creek Church in Lansing, Michigan, and my wife, Sarah, loves looking at the stars. She loves stargazing, looking up into the night sky. She knows all of the constellations. She recently downloaded an app for the boys to learn the constellations as well. She'll let them stay up really late just to see something unique in the sky. In fact, she'll go so far as to wake them up in the middle of the night to get some particularly amazing view of Mars. It's not uncommon to find her in the cold night air on our front porch, staring through a little tube at the heavens. A couple of weeks ago, she drove out to a cemetery out in the country all by herself to get a particularly dark view of this night sky. And when she got out there and got into the cemetery, she ended up getting scared and getting back in the car and driving back home. She grew up north, and her family taught her all of the things to look for in the night sky. I grew up in the city of Indianapolis, where you were lucky to see any stars in the middle of the night. But when I moved to Petoskey up north and began spending more time in the wilderness, I became, well, not quite as interested in the night sky as Sarah is, but interested in what the night sky told us about God. The first longer portion of the Bible that I ever memorized was Psalm 19. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. I wonder, what's your favorite thing in creation to look at and admire? Is it the stars, the sunrise, the sunset, the ocean, something else? Let's have a conversation about that in the comments. Let's talk about it. I love hearing what you like to admire in creation. When you look up at the night sky or anywhere, at least when I do, I see God's fingerprints all over it, kind of like a toddler with their fingerprints all over a glass door. Or do you? Not everyone sees God's fingerprints in the heavens. Some scientists and philosophers liken seeing God in the sky to believing in a giant teapot that's orbiting around the earth. Hank Green of Crash Course, the PBS internet show, presents the opposite philosophical case for not believing in God. Watch and listen.
Before we go, I want to head to the thought bubble for some flash philosophy. Our old friend Bertrand Russell once posited the existence of a China teapot orbiting the sun somewhere between Earth and Mars. Let's say that back on Earth there were a bunch of teapotists, people who argued that since we can't disprove the teapot's existence, they were justified in believing in it. Not only that, they constructed great buildings, erected statues, composed songs, held weekly services, and appealed to the teapot for help in their daily lives. But everyone else thought the teapotists were ridiculous because there was no evidence to support their belief in the teapot. For their part, the teapotists just replied that none of the ateapotists could prove that it wasn't there. Thanks, Thought Bubble. And I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. Pragmatism, or the leap to faith, might be a solution to the problem of God's existence if you're not satisfied with any of the other more evidence-based arguments. But believing in something because it's expedient, or because it frees you from having to have any reasons at all, can still have its risks. After all, if we can leap to God, we can also leap to Russell's teapot, or to the flying spaghetti monster. Or, much worse, we could leap to particular beliefs about God, like that he wants us to deny rights to certain kinds of people, or kill them. These beliefs aren't representative of the views of most theists, but the problem is, if you're giving up on reasons and evidence, all beliefs are philosophically equal. We count on evidence and justification to help us adjudicate between beliefs, to decide what we value. If you throw that out and fall back on faith alone, the sum of your religious arguments is going to end up being, I have faith in the things I choose to have faith in. And in that case, no one can tell anyone else that their belief is wrong, or dangerous, or unjustified, because you can't justify faith.
Hank Green makes a strong case. Can you justify faith? Is there evidence for belief? I'm curious what you think. Let's talk about that. Anytime you go beyond the evidence, you justify it. That's faith. You have to go beyond reason, but not against reason. So a priest and a physicist walk into a bar. You complete the joke. I love this series that we're in. We've had several people on my Facebook page complete the joke. Here's some of them. Now, to understand this one, you got to understand a little bit of geeky science, all right? A neutrino is so small that 100 trillion go through your body every second. And one can go through 7 light years of steel without ever touching anything. All right, so with that little bit of science knowledge, here's the joke. A priest and a physicist walk into a bar. The physicist says, "I have a neutrino that rarely interacts with people." The priest says, "Worry not, my son. Your neutrino just needs a little more mass." All right, while we're telling science jokes, why can you never trust atoms? Because they make up everything. There are 2 types of people in the world. Those who can extrapolate from incomplete data. All right, here is the idea in Hank Green's video. You just believe in God for no reason at all. Like a cosmic teapot or a spaghetti monster like the Pastafarians want to claim. And without evidence, all beliefs are equal, right? Well, you don't believe in a cosmic teapot because there is no evidence for a cosmic teapot. But there are compelling reasons to believe in God. I think out there in our culture, there's this idea that if you're a person of faith, you're a person who just ignores evidence, ignores reason, that you're irrational. Richard Dawkins got at this with the title of his book, The God Delusion. If you believe in God, then you must be delusional. It's sometimes presented that there's a fight between science and faith. But to that, at Sycamore Creek, we say, no! God wants you to use your brain. Whatever you believe, you have to go beyond the evidence, but not against it. It's not enough just to say you can't disprove something. So what we want to do today is we want to look at 2 arguments for believing in God that intersect with science. 2 arguments. All right, here's the first one. The Big Bang. I'm not talking about the TV show. I'm talking about the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang. Imagine with me a balloon. And on that balloon are dots. And as you put air in that balloon, those dots start out close together, but they get further and further away the more air in the balloon. That's what's happening in our universe. It's expanding and things are getting further and further away from each other. Space is expanding. But 13.7 billion years ago, everything in the universe was in an infinitesimally small dot, a singular space. Now, the church that I grew up in was skeptical of the Big Bang Theory. They thought, oh, this is just one more atheistic scientific belief that scientists trot out to try to disprove God. But the historical story is actually the exact opposite. Scientists originally didn't like the Big Bang Theory because of what it implied about the universe having a beginning. You see, scientists have a really hard time believing the idea that you can get something from nothing. Their way of thinking is that if there is something, then there must always have been something. There can't be a beginning. This something must have been eternal and uncreated. But as scientists looked up into the night sky, up into the heavens, they saw different evidence. They saw evidence that pointed in the direction of a beginning. Let's walk through that historical story. It's hard to figure out where to start, but let's start with Vesto Slipher in 1912. Vesto Slipher was the first to notice the redshift in distant galaxies. The redshift is the light equivalent of the Doppler effect. You know the Doppler effect? When a race car goes by? As it's coming towards you, the sound waves are compressed and are a pitch higher. And as the race car is going away from you, the sound waves expand and it drops a pitch. The same thing happens with light. When light is traveling away from you, it has a slight red tint to it. This redshift was the first evidence for an expanding universe. Enter into the story none other than Albert Einstein. Y'all know who he is, right? E equals mc squared. He's the founder of the theory of relativity. And Einstein believed in a static universe, not expanding, not contracting. In 1916, during World War I, he sat down with another scientist, Willem de Sitter. No pun intended. And William de Sitter believed that the universe had to be expanding. But Einstein didn't like this idea. He said, "This circumstance irritates me." In another letter to de Sitter, he wrote, "To admit such possibilities seems senseless." So they met in neutral Holland in a cafe to argue things out. In 1928 comes along Edwin Hubble. probably best known for the telescope that's named after him, the Hubble telescope. Edwin Hubble saw through his telescope that the universe was expanding more and more. And not only that, it was expanding faster and faster. What this meant was that the universe would continue expanding on and on. In fact, it wouldn't be like what some scientists thought, that it would be an oscillating universe. It would expand out and pull back in on itself, expand out and pull back in on itself. But rather, what Hubble showed is that it's expanding and it will just eventually expand into oblivion. Now what scientists understand is that there's not enough matter to have the gravity to pull the universe back in on itself for a big crunch. In fact, the oscillating theory of the universe contradicts the first law of thermodynamics. You see, if the universe expanded out and then crunched back in on itself, the second expansion wouldn't have as much energy as the first. And then if it crunched back in on itself again, the third expansion would have even less energy. It couldn't go on for eternity. In 1927, enter Father George Lemaître. Notice that dog collar around his neck there. George Lemaître was a Catholic priest who is credited as putting together all of these pieces into the final basic theory that we understand as the Big Bang Theory, that there was a beginning of the universe. What scientists now believe is that the universe will eventually burn out all of its energy and die into nothingness. In other words, this is a one-shot universe. No, not that kind of shot. The Big Bang is a point of singularity. It is where time and space begin. There is no time before, there is only time after. Is this the end of what science can answer? Scientists have wrestled with this throughout history. Sir Eddington, the first to prove Einstein's theory of relativity, said, "The notion of a beginning is repugnant to me. I simply do not believe that the present order of things started off with a Big Bang. The expanding universe is preposterous, incredible. It leaves me cold." Well, Eddington, it will eventually leave all of us cold. Walter Nernst, a German chemist who paved the way for the third law of thermodynamics, said, "To deny the infinite duration of time would be to betray the very foundations of science." Now, this hasn't necessarily been a problem for scientists who are also believers. For example, Robert Jastrow was an astronomer and a believer, and he wrote the book God and the Astronomers. And this is what he said: "For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries." You see, the scientific evidence that there is a beginning of the universe is one reason to believe in God. Now, like scientists say, something has to be eternal and the cause of the things that are not eternal. Let me be clear here. We are precariously close to a mistake that Christians often make called the God of the gaps. We don't yet understand or know, so that must be God. The Big Bang Theory does not prove the existence of God, but it is a good reason to believe in the existence of God. All right, I told you I was going to give you 2 reasons that intersect with science for believing in God. The first one was the Big Bang. The second one is known as the fine-tuning of the universe, or the anthropomorphic principle. You can think of this like a radio dial. Do you know a radio dial? This is actually a little before my age even. You see, on a radio dial, you would tune it one way or another, and if you were a little too far off one way, you got static noise, and if you were a little too far off the other way, you got static noise. But if you hit it right on the frequency that the station was broadcasting on, you got the music. The universe is finely tuned like that as well. Or you can think of it as 2 magnets with a piece of metal right in the middle. And if you have those 2 magnets perfectly balanced on each side of that piece of metal, it will hold it in place. But if you move one magnet a little too far, the metal will drop. Well, the universe is not just 2 magnets, it's like 47 magnets. These are called cosmological constants. All matter is held together by balanced forces. This is what keeps things solid. There's an infinite number of ways for this to be wrong, but there's only one way for it to be right. Science doesn't answer how matter has its properties. It only describes what properties it has. Let me give you an example of one constant. It's the ratio of electromagnetic force constant to the gravitational force constant. That's a mouthful. If this force was altered by 1 in 10 to the 40th, that's 10 times 10, 40 times, stars wouldn't be able to produce elements beyond helium. There would be no carbon, no oxygen, no nitrogen, which is all required for life. You can think of it this way. Imagine dimes stacked from here to the moon, then multiply it by 1 billion. If one of those dimes was different, life wouldn't be able to exist. The less probable something is, the less appealing it is to explain it by chance. Imagine going to the casino with me, all right? And you go up to the craps table and you pick up the 2 dice and you throw the dice and you get snake eyes, 2 ones. You know, that's not that big of a chance. It's a 1 in 36 chance. But you pick those 2 dice up and you throw it again and you get snake eyes again. That's not all that unusual. It's a 1 in 2096 chance. But you pick up those 2 dice and you throw them again and you get snake eyes 3 times in a row. Now that's 1 in 2,176,782,336 chance. You might start to think that the casino has given you loaded dice. Something is fishy. So let me dumb the this is ridiculous. I'm being dumb trying to say cosmological constants. Let me dumb down the cosmological constants. Let's imagine a 1 in 6 chance for 47 constants. What's the chances of that being right? It's 6 to the 47th power.
Google, how much is 6 to the 47th power?
The answer is 3 undecillion 742 decillion 42 nonillion 951 octillion 225 septillion 759 sextillion 400 quintillion.
That, friends, is an astronomically improbable chance. But I told you I was going to dumb it down to 1 in 6 chance. That's not actually what it is. All scientists agree on the numbers of probability. The probability that our universe would exist as it is a 1 in 10 to the 154th power chance.
Google, what is 10 to the 154th power?
The answer is 99999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999
So how do scientists explain this infinitesimally small probable thing actually resulting in you and me? The leading theory is the multiverse theory, or the many worlds theory. Now we're starting to sound like serious science fiction.
We exist in a universe which coexists with a multitude of others in the same physical space. At certain brief periods of time, an area of their space overlaps an area of ours.
You see, if you have an infinite number of worlds or parallel universes, then you have an infinite number of throws of the dice. So infinitely small probable things have the possibility of actually happening. This theory plays out in one of two ways. Either we happen to be in the one universe that got it right, or every possibility that could happen is happening simultaneously in multiple parallel universes and other dimensions. In this universe, the Allies thankfully won World War II, but in a parallel universe, like the man in the high castle, the Nazis and the Japanese, the Axis, won World War II. Now there are some problems with this theory. One of the problems is that it is mathematically internally consistent, but there is no evidence for it. Zero evidence. That doesn't mean that we won't find evidence someday. But the second problem with it from a Christian perspective is, well, where did the multiverse come from? You see, the scientific evidence for the fine-tuning of the universe is a second reason to believe in God. So let's go back to that question that we started with. Can you justify faith? Perhaps. Is there evidence for God? There is evidence, and there are reasons for faith. So I'd love to hear how you're interacting with these two ideas. Let's have a conversation in the comments. Which of these two reasons for believing in God is most compelling to you? The Big Bang Theory or the fine-tuning of the universe? Or is there another reason that you find compelling evidence to believe in God? Let's talk about that. What a great conversation we're having. Thanks so much for joining in and engaging us today. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to show that there are reasons and there is evidence for believing in God. It's not just like believing in a cosmic teapot that's orbiting our world where there is no evidence for it. But does this evidence or do these reasons prove God? Absolutely not. You can't prove the existence of God. If there is a beginning and if the universe is finely tuned, then what was the first cause? What got the ball rolling? An unmoved mover, an eternal God. You know, if the chance that you and I are here is 1 in 10 to the 154th power, that means that everything is a miracle. This building behind me is a miracle. The chair that you're sitting on is a miracle. Your body and my body, our brains are miracles. They are infinitesimally small probability that they would exist at all. So what makes sense of all this? The Christian answer is a God who created out of an overflow of an abundance of love. And now we're back to Psalm 19. We don't often do a call and response at Sycamore Creek, but even if you're sitting at home, I want to invite you to do this. Say it out loud. I'll start with the call on the screen, and you say out loud the response on the screen. This call and response is written from Psalm 19. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. We look for glory and celebrate that handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. We listen for that speech and open ourselves up to that knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard, yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. Teach us, God, to hear your wordless speech, to behold your matchless wisdom, and to never take for granted the wonder of your magnificent creation. And all who agreed said, Amen.